Hi, it's StormyWriter here again. As a writer of a vampire novel, it probably comes as no surprise that I have a deep love for vampires. Several years ago, when I was about 8, several years ago, decades ago, when I was about 8, Santa was allowed to bring us a specific book from the Scholastic school book list. The book that I wanted was True Monsters, or True Life Monsters, Real Monsters. It was something to do with monsters anyway. And I was told even then that little girls don't want such books. But I was like, well, if Santa knows what I want, he knows I'll be well into that. And the book was about monsters. It had the Loch Ness, it had Sasquatch, Bigfoot, the Yowie, which was the first time I'd come across this term, werewolves, and of course vampires. And there was something about the way the book portrayed vampires that really spoke to me. From then on, I was kind of hooked. The first film that got me well and truly hooked, and something I've spoken about before, is Lost Boys. I think for most 80s kids who are into horror, The Lost Boys is one of the films that may not be great now looking back at it, but it's still something of an awe-inspiring piece. The one-liners, the music, and just David being one of the most charismatic vampires ever. Beautiful film. But I'm not here to talk about Lost Boys because, as I've said, I've spoken about it before. What I want to talk about today is a vampire film that I've only seen recently, which I should have seen years ago, and it's had a profound effect. That film is The Hunger. Now, part of the reason why I should have seen this years ago is nearly on par with my obsession with vampires is my obsession with David Bowie. Again, this was something that was started in the 80s with Labyrinth. Again, a child of the 80s, this was a staple film that you grew up on. And again, it's not perfect in retrospect. However, there's something about it that just captures you. Again, it's the same thing. It's the music, it's the styling, it's the one-liners. It's David again, but this time it's David Bowie playing Jareth. Obviously, as I've got older, I've appreciated it for different reasons. There's no comments here about the bulge, but it's still a film that spoke to me. And it's still a film I put on regularly, and I listen to the soundtrack quite a lot as well, which is the same as what I do with Lost Boys. So it surprised me that it took me so long to get to The Hunger. Part of the reason I think it took me so long to get to the film is the book. Now, the book is written by Whitley Strieber, who is also known for Wolfen. I'm not sure if the book's called The Wolfen or just Wolfen, but that then got turned into the film Wolfen. Again, another 80s staple. He's also known for the Communication series, where he has an alien experience and writes about it as fact, not fiction, as fact. This then sends him towards all sorts of alien encounter books, which are not great. Saying that though, I didn't think The Hunger itself was a good book. There was something lacking in emotion about it. I know vampires can be portrayed as cold, but the love that, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the characters' names. I think it's Miriam, the Catherine Deneuve character in the film. The love that she clearly has for her lovers, one of which is played by David Bowie, seems to be at odds with the way that the book is written. It's written, at least from my point of view, quite clinically. The ending I did not like. I did not like at all. It just seemed to stop. There seemed to be no conclusion, or at least not a satisfactory conclusion. So that is what put me off the film, even though critically I knew that the film was highly regarded. I knew that it had been beautifully filmed and was considered one of the strongest David Bowie performances. But I was still put off by it. Oh, but boy, when I did get around to it, all the things that you've read or heard about the film is true. It is beautifully shot. The acting chops, not only of David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve, Susan Sarandon as well shines in those roles. It was almost like a trifecta of glory that these three actors came together. For those of you that don't know the film or don't know the book, essentially it's about a love triangle. I'm going to stick with Miriam as the Catherine Deneuve's character's name. Is an ancient vampire, and when she turns her vampire lovers, she promises them eternal life. And to be fair, she doesn't lie to them. They do get eternal life. Unfortunately, unlike her, they don't get eternal youth. This causes a problem, because Miriam, for all her love for all of her lovers, is actually turned on aesthetically. I mean, there's a certain point where, you know, the body cannot function the way it's supposed to, and therefore attraction goes out the window. The latest victim of Miriam's veiled truth is the David Bowie character, whose name I cannot recall at all, so apologies. He is now aging, and he is aging rapidly. So Miriam is on her way to look for her next replacement. Her replacement, again, whose character's name I can't remember, is Susan Sarandon. Susan Sarandon is a doctor who is introduced to Miriam and is an instant attraction, because after all, Miriam is a vampire. We see the kind of struggles between the three characters dealing with what is going to be their fate. For me, the most iconically beautiful moment comes where, I don't say David Bowie's character is called John, or suddenly popped into my head, apologies if this is wrong, but John is at a stage where he is basically walking, talking, skin and bones. He is a zombie, but not a zombie, because he hasn't died, yet he's not living either. It's a very, very strange kind of intermediate between life and death. And Miriam gently places him in a coffin, and she says the line, "He will be kept warm amongst my other loves." And as you pan out, you see all these other coffins, all filled with these lovers that are hovering between life and death. There was an interesting paradox about the film as well. Miriam knows every time she is turning somebody, she is condemning him to this, at some point, intermediately life, something somewhere between life and death, and yet she continues to do it. There's some element of hoping that the next time will be different, that, you know, something will be different about the next person that she chooses, but ultimately she knows that at some point She's going to outlive these people and will have to find somebody that's new. It shows the strength of fear, of loneliness. Nobody wants to be alone, not for long periods of time. Everybody needs and should have me time, alone time. But weeks, months, decades, centuries of alone time will be disturbing to the soul. Even monsters need companionship. It's something that we see again and again and again when it comes to kind of monster movies. The knowing of the beast inside and the desire to not be alone. Knowing that ultimately the person that you may choose as a companion could end up being your victim one day. This is so beautifully highlighted in The Hunger. And that is ultimately why I enjoy this film. I personally am not a great person for a long time. I've recently, due to circumstances, had to spend 10 days on my own. And it's now getting to a point where I'm struggling. I want to feel companionship. And I don't have it. Ultimately, if you've read The Hunger and, like me, are completely put off by watching the film, don't be. Go out and chase it. If you haven't seen it, for whatever reason, I highly recommend it. If you're a Bowie fan, I recommend it. If you're a vampire fan, I recommend it. If you're a voyeur, there's some scenes that make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, then I recommend it. In a decade that brought us a lot of very tawdry slashers, and I think that's what ultimately a lot of people, when you say I'm a fan of 80s horror, they go, oh, you mean the kind of slash and hunt films. No, that some of them are great, don't get me wrong, but there are more than that in the 80s, and films like The Hunger prove that in the 80s they could do artsy, well cinematographed films with power and a little lesbian sex, and would still be a top contender in horror films. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my little spiel, and I'll speak to you guys again soon.